In 180 AD, the Roman Empire stood on uncertain ground. Power struggles, invasions, famine. And at the center of it all, an emperor who didn't want to be one. Marcus Aurelius, a man burdened with authority he didn't chase, and responsibility he couldn't run from. Unlike the rulers before him, Marcus didn't leave behind speeches or decrees to define his rule. He left behind pages, notes, thoughts written not to impress others, but to keep himself steady. He called it To Himself. What we now call meditations was never meant to be read by anyone. It was a conversation between a man and his own mind. No audience, no approval, just questions and reminders written in the early hours of the morning or late at night, while the empire asked more of him than most men could give. His writings weren't polished. They weren't meant to be. They weren't filled with metaphors or grand visions. They were short, direct, and brutally honest. Notes like, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." He wrote these things down, not because he didn't know them, but because he kept forgetting. That's the reason Marcus wrote to himself, not to express feelings, not to track events, but to stay on course. It was a kind of training. Every line, every reminder was a small resistance against the pull of ego, fear, and emotion. He wasn't writing about the world, he was writing about how to respond to it. What separated Marcus from others wasn't that he was free from stress or weakness. It was that he practiced seeing things clearly, every day, through his writing. His journal wasn't a place to vent, it was a place to clean his thinking. This is what most people miss when they talk about journaling today. For many, writing is emotional release. It's about documenting how they feel or what they're going through. And there's value in that. But that wasn't what Marcus was doing. He wasn't asking how he felt. He was asking, what is the right thing to do? What would reason say? What is actually within my control right now? Where modern journaling often asks, what happened to me? Stoic journaling asks, what did I do with what happened? One type seeks to be heard. The other seeks to understand. Marcus saw writing as discipline, a way to strip away illusions, to keep the self in check. When his thoughts wandered, he used the pen to bring them back. When anger showed up, he asked whether it served him. When life seemed unfair, he reminded himself, life never promised fairness. He wrote to remember, to keep his mind focused on what he could control, his actions, his responses, his choices. Everything else he trained himself to accept. He didn't seek perfection in his writing. He sought clarity. That's why some passages contradict each other. That's why many sound like they're written by someone wrestling with the same ideas over and over. Because he was. Stoic journaling wasn't about arriving at wisdom. It was about rehearsing it, again and again. Marcus knew the mind couldn't be trusted to hold the line without effort. So he made writing that effort. The page was his sparring partner, his test ground, his mirror. There are no titles in meditations, no dates, no storyline. Just short, tight lines. Reminders to act justly, to stay modest, to think before speaking, to see death not as tragedy, but as nature. He didn't write to sound wise. He wrote to avoid forgetting what wisdom looked like. And he kept going, not because it was new, but because it was easy to forget. Every day in the Roman Empire, he faced decisions that shaped the fate of millions. And still, his biggest challenge was himself. His thoughts, his impulses, his judgments. That's what made the journal necessary. Not a diary of emotions, but a tool, a method, a practice. He wrote to become who he wanted to be. Not once, but every single day. When Marcus Aurelius became emperor, Rome was anything but stable. The empire was under attack on several borders. Disease swept through cities. Generals turned against each other. Food shortages, riots, corruption. It didn't stop. And through it all, the weight of every decision landed on him. There was no time to think deeply in the middle of battle. No space to pause during negotiations. No room for error when leading troops. But Marcus found time anyway. Not for speeches, not for strategy meetings, for writing. He kept a journal. Not because he wanted to be a writer, but because it was necessary. It was the one space where he could see clearly. He didn't use it to complain. He didn't use it to dream. He used it to stay sharp, to train his judgment, to keep order in his thinking when everything outside of him was falling apart. Every morning, every night between decisions and after conflict, he wrote. Lines like, "Don't waste time arguing about what a good man should be one." Or, "Choose not to be harmed, and you won't be." They weren't written for anyone else. They were reminders, anchors. The empire could burn, his mind couldn't. Marcus understood something simple. Chaos around you is not the real threat. Confusion inside you is. And writing was how he dealt with that. He practiced the idea of amor fati, to accept whatever happens, not just endure it, but to treat it as something useful. If he faced war, he asked what virtue that situation could build. If there was illness, he asked what it could teach. Through writing, he turned setbacks into tasks. He wrote through plague outbreaks. He wrote while on military campaigns. He wrote when his co-emperor betrayed him. There's a passage where he reminds himself, "You may leave this life right now. Let that determine what you do, say, and think." He wasn't speaking to anyone. He was telling himself how to behave when panic might be easier. This was memento mori. Remember death, not to be morbid, but to stay focused. When you remember that time is short, you don't waste it worrying about things you can't shape. You stay on track. He also trained apatheia, freedom from being controlled by your reactions. In one note he says, "If it's endurable, then endure it. If it's not, stop complaining." These weren't slogans, they were tools. They helped him hold the line. Most people, when under pressure, start reacting. They lash out. They second guess. They get caught in fear. But Marcus was working on something different. He didn't want to be controlled by events. He wanted to respond based on reason. That's why he wrote, to prepare himself, to test his thoughts before putting them into the world. Journaling was how he built a gap between what happened to him and what he did next. While others sought comfort, Marcus sought clarity, and writing gave it to him. This wasn't self-expression. This was self-alignment. The page didn't care what he was going through. It just asked, what matters now? What's right? What's in your hands? During the Antonine Plague, when thousands were dying, he didn't write about fear. He wrote about perspective. He wrote about action. He reminded himself that nature controls life and death, but his role was to live well until the end. He faced revolts. His own General Cassius tried to take his throne, and yet in his writings there's no bitterness. Only questions about justice, responsibility, and calm. He didn't write to release anger. He wrote to avoid it. He never stopped writing. Even on campaign, sleeping in tents, riding through enemy lands, he carried his journal. That was the one discipline he didn't abandon. The meditations weren't created in peace. They came from crisis. And that's what makes them powerful. They weren't ideas crafted in theory. They were tested in real life, under pressure, with real consequences. His journal was armor, but not to hide behind, to move forward. It was how he remembered what mattered, what couldn't be taken from him, what couldn't be changed by public opinion, disease, betrayal, or pain. This is what journaling did for Marcus. It wasn't optional. It was how he stayed in control when nothing else was. That's what Stoic journaling is, not a record of feelings, not a place to be heard. It's a system, a checkpoint, a way to reset the mind when the world refuses to slow down. For Marcus, writing wasn't about expression. It was orientation. Stoic journaling isn't a list of events. It's not about what happened during the day. It's about how to think about what happened. That's the core of it. For the Stoics, the facts don't matter as much as the way the mind responds to them. Marcus Aurelius never sat down to write about what someone said to him or what time he woke up. He wrote about how he responded to difficulty, how he could have handled himself better, what he misunderstood, where he let useless thoughts get in the way of what mattered. The writing wasn't passive, it was deliberate. Each line was built on certain ideas that the Stoics treated as non-negotiable. One of the most important was control. What can you influence, and what can you not? This was the starting point for almost every reflection. Marcus would look at a situation and ask, "Is this mine to shape?" If it wasn't, he dropped it. If it was, he focused on what he could do. This wasn't just theory, it was applied. If someone insulted him, he didn't ask, "Why did they say that?" He asked, "What part of this can I govern? The answer, his reaction. That's it. Not their tone, not their opinion. Just the space between stimulus and response. That's the first filter. The second was about standards. Not feelings, but actions. What mattered wasn't what he felt, but whether he acted in line with reason. Virtue, for the Stoics, meant choosing the right thing, even when the easy thing would be more comfortable. In his writings, Marcus would ask if his decisions were fair, if they were wise, if he acted from understanding or from impulse. He didn't justify behavior based on how he felt in the moment. He asked whether he was living up to his role as a rational being. Emotions were natural, but they weren't supposed to guide action. That was the job of reason. When someone tested his patience, he didn't say, "I was angry." He wrote, "Was my response guided by logic or by habit?" When things didn't go his way, he didn't ask why the world wasn't easier. He wrote, "Did I do what was right, regardless of the result?" That's the second lens. Not what you feel, but whether what you did was guided by principle. The third is time. Everything ends, everyone disappears. That was clear to the Stoics, and Marcus made it a part of his practice. He'd remind himself that even emperors are forgotten, that fame is short, that pain passes, that life is constantly changing and nothing stays the same. He used this to keep events in perspective. If something bothered him, he asked whether it would matter in a year, in 10. If someone offended him, he reminded himself that both of them would be gone soon enough. Death wasn't to be feared. It was to be used as a measure of what matters. The third filter is impermanence. And it wasn't just for acceptance, it was for clarity. He used it to strip distractions, to cut through anxiety, to remind himself that most of what feels urgent is actually irrelevant over time. With these three, control, virtue, and time, Marcus built a system. He didn't journal for creativity. He journaled to correct his thinking. It was a mental audit, a check-in. Every entry ran through those filters. He'd start by naming a situation. Then he'd ask, "Is this up to me?" If not, it was dismissed. If yes, he moved to the next question. Did I act with principle? And finally, he'd zoom out. Does this still matter when seen from a wider lens? Each page was training. It wasn't about answers. It was about the habit of questioning the right things, over and over, until that process became automatic. There are no long stories in meditations, no detailed memories, just notes, thoughts, arguments with himself. Not to explain what happened, but to reshape how he saw it. That's the point of Stoic journaling, to interrupt the loop, to bring reason into the places where instinct usually takes over, to turn moments into lessons, and to return to those same ideas, not once, but constantly. Because no matter how many times you understand something, life gives you plenty of chances to forget. And so he kept writing. Most people don't stick to journaling, not because they don't want to, but because they've never been shown how to make it useful. They try it once or twice, stare at the page, and say there's nothing to say. But the problem isn't the silence. The problem is they don't know what to listen for. The Stoics weren't writing poetry. They weren't trying to capture memories. They were working with the mind. They were fixing broken thoughts, checking behavior, reviewing choices. That's why their writing lasted. It wasn't dramatic, it was functional. If you want to build a journal that does the same thing, the tool doesn't matter much. Some use a notebook, some use a keyboard, others use apps. Marcus used wax tablets and probably reused them. Seneca wrote letters that doubled as practice. What matters isn't the medium, it's the method. Pen and paper slow you down. That's useful when you want to think deliberately. Screens are faster, digital notes are easier to search, apps can remind you to write. All that can help. But the point is to get the thoughts out, to see what's happening inside, to test them against reason. Start when your mind is clear. The morning is when your decisions begin. That's the best time to set direction. The evening is when your attention is low, but your memory is full. That's the best time to review what you did. You can write at either end, or both. But it has to be daily. That's what builds the pattern. Each entry doesn't need to be long, but it needs to follow a path. The best structure is 4 parts. Start with a question. What did I do today that I regret? What fear is controlling my decision? What am I avoiding? These aren't small questions. They open the space for reflection. Then, write a short answer. Don't explain the whole situation, just the thinking behind it. What was the logic? What did I assume? This part is about seeing your reasoning. Next, challenge it. Was that true? Was it useful? What would a better thought have been? The Stoics use their journal to test assumptions. That's what this step is for. Last, write one action. What do I change tomorrow? What habit gets interrupted? What line will I repeat in my mind next time the same thing shows up? Question. Reflection. Challenge. Action. That's the cycle. It works because it trains attention. Over time, you don't just notice when you write. You notice when you act. That's the real goal. Most people say, I don't know what to write. But that's not true. Everyone thinks. Everyone reacts. Everyone notices. They just don't slow down enough to observe their own thinking. The page forces you to pause. That's the value. If you can't think of a question, write a moment. Then ask why it stood out. Then ask what it reveals about you. Then ask what could be done next time. It's not about style. It's about honesty. No one else is reading it. There's nothing to prove. You're not reporting. You're cleaning the lens. You don't need prompts forever. Once the habit builds, the thoughts come faster. You'll start to notice the same patterns. That's when journaling starts working. When you see the repetition, the same mistake in new clothes, the same excuse in a different voice. Marcus didn't write new ideas every day. He returned to the same ones. That's what made them stick. You won't see results at first. There's no immediate payoff, no applause, just the page. But after weeks, then months, you start catching yourself before the reaction. You notice the emotion before it speaks. You question the thought before it turns into behavior. That's what journaling does. It brings space. And in that space, you find better options. You don't need to know what to say. You just need to start looking. The answers are already there. You're not building something new. You're removing what's in the way, one entry at a time. What is in my control today? This is the foundation. Before you respond, before you act, before the day starts pressing down, ask this. You don't control other people. You don't direct outcomes. But you control your words. You decide how to treat others. You choose where your focus goes. Someone cuts you off in traffic. You can't stop that. But you can control whether you carry that anger into your next meeting. That's where the power is, not in fixing the world, but in managing yourself in it. What would the wise person do? When you hesitate, when you're unsure, use this. Imagine someone you respect. Not perfect, but steady. What would they say here? Would they stay silent or speak up? Would they hold on or let it go? You're not trying to impress anyone. You're using a model. This removes ego. It clears emotion. It reminds you that you've seen better choices, and you're capable of them too. What did I fear, and was it rational? Fear makes simple problems look complex. It pushes you into delay. It keeps you quiet when you should speak. It makes you chase things you don't even want. Look at what you avoided today. Was it a conversation, a decision, a change? Now ask, was the fear real, or was it a story you told yourself? Most fears dissolve when inspected. That's why the Stoics ask this question often, not to remove fear completely, but to make it visible. Because once you see it, it starts to shrink. Where did I act without virtue? Not every mistake is external. Sometimes you got the outcome but not the process. You won the argument but lost your patience. You avoided blame but didn't take responsibility. Virtue isn't about results. It's about method. Did you act with justice? Were you honest? Were you disciplined? These are harder questions, but they point to something more solid. That's what Stoicism is about. You aren't judged by fortune. You're judged by who you are when no one's watching. If today were my last, would I be proud of how I lived it? This isn't about fear of death. It's about clarity. If your time ended today, would it have counted? Were your actions real, or were they noise? You don't need to save the world. You just need to be proud of the day. That might mean apologizing. It might mean working harder. It might mean saying no when it's easier to say yes. Ask this in the morning and again at night. Use it to strip the waste from your calendar, your habits, your thinking. What desire or aversion clouded my judgment? Most mistakes don't come from lack of knowledge. They come from pressure, wanting something too much, avoiding something too strongly. You rushed a deal because you wanted approval. You stayed quiet because you feared conflict. These are distortions. They block judgment, and they show up daily. Name them, track them. Over time, you start to notice them sooner. And when you see the distortion, you can correct the aim. What am I attached to that's temporary? You lose sleep over a number in your bank account. You stress about a reputation that changes overnight. You tie your mood to things that can be taken away. The Stoics trained themselves to remember all of it is temporary. Possessions, titles, even relationships, none of it is permanent. That doesn't mean you don't care. It means you don't let them define you. You can use them, appreciate them, but don't depend on them. This is how you stay grounded when things shift. How did I practice courage today? Courage isn't just for war or crisis. It shows up in small decisions. Speaking the truth when it's easier to lie. Admitting you're wrong when pride wants to win. Saying no to what you know is wrong. These are everyday moments. You won't notice them unless you look for them, so look. Ask this at night. Then set the intention to find it again tomorrow. Because courage isn't a feeling. It's a choice. Who or what triggered me, and why? Something upset you. Someone said something that got under your skin. Write it down. Then ask why it mattered. Most triggers point to something internal. Insecurity, control, old habits. The Stoics didn't blame the outside world. They used it to see themselves more clearly. You can't stop triggers, but you can study them. And if you do it enough, you start seeing them as signals, not threats. What do I need to let go of to be free? This one goes deep. Look at what's weighing on you. A mistake, a grudge, a fantasy of how things were supposed to go. These things sit in the mind and take up space. Freedom isn't about doing whatever you want. It's about not being controlled by things you don't need. Letting go doesn't mean you forget. It means you stop carrying it as if it's part of who you are. Ask this weekly or daily. You'll find new answers every time. These 10 prompts aren't random. They're based on principles the Stoics return to every day. Control, reason, impermanence, virtue, self-awareness. You don't need to use all of them at once. Pick one. Write it down. Sit with it. Let it shape your thinking. Because real journaling isn't about the words on the page. It's about what those words do to the way you move through the world. Marcus didn't write to be remembered. He wrote to manage his thoughts. Over time, it became his system, his process of testing ideas, questioning reactions, changing patterns. What we call meditations was never meant to be a book. It was a habit, a mental routine, a method for staying steady in chaos. Modern psychology has a name for what Marcus was doing: cognitive behavioral work. He observed thoughts, tracked behavior, and rewrote the script. No therapist, no clinic, just pen and mind. Most people wait until things go wrong to examine their thinking. Marcus didn't wait. He wrote daily, in quiet, in crisis, on campaign, in illness. Not to feel better, but to think better. This wasn't reflection for reflection's sake. It was correction. He caught his assumptions, checked his expectations. Every entry was a small reset. You have power over your mind, he wrote. Not outside events. That wasn't theory. It was his anchor. He faced betrayal, disease, war, loss, and kept writing. Because the page doesn't solve the world, it helps you stop lying to yourself about it. Most thinking runs in loops. You react, judge, repeat. Over time, those loops become reflex. And most people don't notice they're stuck in them. Stoic journaling cuts through that cycle. It brings those thoughts into daylight. And once they're there, you can study them. That's how habits shift. That's how you learn to respond instead of react. This kind of writing builds something deeper than motivation. It trains pattern recognition. You spot the emotion before it becomes action. You see the story before it takes hold. You name the fear before it becomes delay. That's how journaling creates resilience. Not by removing difficulty, but by removing distortion. The Stoics didn't aim for perfect thoughts. They aimed for clear ones. You don't need to be right all the time. You need to be honest. When the same issue appears, you write it again. When a judgment repeats, you test it again. This repetition builds clarity, and clarity builds strength. This isn't about being calm, it's about being capable. Life doesn't slow down, but journaling gives you time within the moment, space between thought and choice. That's the real goal, not control of everything around you, but control of yourself within it. Marcus didn't claim to be wise. He was training, day by day, entry by entry, not for praise, not for publication, but to stop his own mind from drifting. That's the habit, that's the practice, and that's why it still matters. Start with 1 page, no special notebook, no complex format. Just you, a question, and 10 minutes. Day 1, ask, what is in my control today? Write what you can manage, thoughts, choices, attitude. That's it. No edits, no trying to sound smart. Keep it simple. Read it back once, then move on with your day. Day 2, what would the wise person do? You're not writing to impress anyone. You're thinking through behavior. You made a mistake, write it. You avoided a hard truth, note it. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is seeing clearly. Day 3. What did I fear, and was it real? Doesn't need to be a big fear. Maybe you didn't ask a question because you were worried about looking wrong. Maybe you avoided a task because it felt too much. Write it down. Was the fear based on facts or just habit? Day 4. Where did I act without virtue? Don't moralize, just track. Did you cut a corner, ignore a responsibility, blame someone when you could have owned it? Put it on the page. You're not judging yourself, you're mapping your habits. Day 5. If today were my last, would I be okay with how I lived it? Use this to reset. What filled your time? Who did you speak with? What work mattered? If the answer feels off, that's useful. Don't chase a perfect day. Just find a better pattern. Day 6. Who or what triggered me, and why? This is observation. Don't try to fix it yet. Just name it. Someone annoyed you? A comment stayed in your head for hours? Ask what it touched. Insecurity, expectation, pressure. The trigger isn't the issue. Your reaction is. Day 7. What do I need to let go of to be free? This question opens space. You might be holding a past decision, a label, a goal that no longer matters. Put it down in writing, not to forget, but to stop letting it shape your choices. You don't need to publish any of this. You don't need to write well. You need to be consistent. 7 days, 1 prompt per day, same time, same habit, no pressure. If you miss a day, restart. This is mental strength on paper, and if you actually try it, even once, it shifts how you move. Not because the paper changes anything, but because it changes how you think. The prompts are in a free worksheet. Check the link, print it, or keep it digital. Use the comments to track your progress or share what came up. If something clicked, let others know. This isn't about building a following. It's about building awareness. Start today. Write 1 page, ask 1 question, then repeat. When you wake tomorrow, stop waiting for life to make sense. Stop expecting others to be better. Stop wishing the world would calm down, because none of that is in your hands. Marcus would remind you, it's not the world that needs to change, it's how you see it. That's where your real work begins. He didn't have better tools. He didn't have more time. He didn't have perfect conditions. He ruled an empire under pressure. Yet his clearest thoughts were written alone, with no one watching, and no intention to impress. Just clarity. Just practice. Just a page. 1 entry at a time, he trained his mind, not to become smarter, not to gain control, but to stop reacting, to act with reason, to live on his terms, regardless of events. You think the world is different now. It's not. The distractions have changed shape. The pressure has new names. But the problem is the same. Can you stay steady when things don't go your way? Marcus wasn't a saint. He didn't always succeed. He doubted. He hesitated. He made decisions that cost lives, but he kept writing. Because that's how you return to yourself. Not through belief, not through talk, through action. If you want clarity, write. If you want to handle stress, write. If you want to be less angry, more honest, more disciplined, write. But don't do it once. Don't treat it like a fix. Treat it like training. You don't lift a weight once and call yourself strong. You don't write a single page and call yourself stoic. There's no finish line here, just better patterns, and every time you sit down to write, you have a chance to spot one. That's the point. That's the value. You don't control how people treat you, but you control how long you carry it. You don't control outcomes, but you shape your response. That's power, that's peace, that's the core of it. Marcus didn't leave rules, he left reminders. You're not owed anything, you won't get forever. But you do have now. You do have your thoughts, you do have the next page. Use it, not to feel better, not to sound wise, but to see the truth clearly before it slips by again. Thank you for following us through on how to better ourselves by journaling. If you found this video educative, kindly like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you.